Hey everyone, it's Jason Lowe from Oracle here, and this is the Driven by Data workshop that we've set up as part of the hackathon. Stu Coggins on the other end of the line. Hey Stu, how are you?
I'm good, mate. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. So we've had some workshops around the technology like data science and getting into the tenancy and into using the infrastructure to deploy APIs and apps and stuff like that. So we've done that, but really want this session to really go into the whole driven by data theme around these challenges. So let's have a chat about that.
Yeah.
So one of the things that, let me get the elephant in the room kind of question out,
subject, right? Elephant in the room.
Elephant in the room. I wish we had the elephant that we had on Tech Talks in your background so we can actually make that live, but let's do that for next time. But the challenges that we've put up there, they don't necessarily seem overtly Oracle, right? So what has Oracle got to do with 3D modeling, right? With Blender? What has Oracle got to do with the metaverse and Swift UI? So you've been working in this space a fair bit, so it'd be good to get your perspective in the background. What does that mean working in that space and around these challenges?
It's such a good question because it is a bit left field for Oracle. But we've done a lot of work in this space, and it may have gone unnoticed because the sort of line is that Oracle's a database company, ERP company. We've been working with transactions. We've been working with data for a very long time. So that's really the key, and driven by data is really it. The metaverse, you know, as a concept, AR, VR has been around for quite some time, but the metaverse has got a whole new lease of life with the Facebook changes recently. The data that is required to drive the metaverse, we already have a lot of that. So what we're starting to understand is how best to use data. Data visualization has been around for a while as well. Our mission statement is how to look at data in new ways. Well, this is looking at data in new ways. And that's really the key here. We could talk about platforms and tools, but that's not the point. It's a point, but not the point. It's really around how do we best use the data we have access to inside the metaverse, and whether it be modeling or whether it just be rendering the data inside the metaverse in some way, you know, that's really what we're about at this point.
Yeah, you raise a few good points in there, and I really like in terms of it's just those lenses are really about the experiences, but what do you need from those experiences, especially from a racing perspective, simulation, immersive behavior, then you need that data ingested through those lenses.
Yeah, and look, that's the key there as well, is that we've been doing things like IoT and digital twins for quite some time. Again, maybe unnoticed because it's not our core business, but it's there nonetheless. What happens though is that when you look at data visually, you get different cues. You know, whether it be taking raw data in Excel, just some numbers, and you turn it into a chart and you go, wow, look at that. And you instantly see the outliers and you've got something to focus on. When you add a more visual element, and what I really like, if you take the entertainment industry away from the enterprise industry where we sort of traditionally play, what they're trying to do is be more immersive, get you as a fan in a sports case more or closer to the data, or closer to the sport itself through using the data. So, you know, as an example, if you take SailGP, I'm not a sailor. I'm from Birmingham. There's a lot of canals, but not a lot of sailing in Birmingham, funnily enough, or people might argue. Sports like SailGP, sports like Formula One can be quite remote, especially, you know, as they're global sports. So what do we do to get you closer to the action? Well, there's a lot of initiatives now with these sporting organizations to bring you closer to the sport, and how they do that is get you live access to the data. Formula One doesn't traditionally share a lot of data, but you do see that in the coverage. SailGP is the exact opposite. It shares all the data. And so therefore you have this new view of what's going on in the sport that perhaps you didn't before. And if you're particularly interested in one boat or one driver or, one player, depending on the sport, then focus on that. The data's there to do so. So I think you get, like I say, these visual cues, but also more immersive. And that's really that key there is, how do I get more fan engagement? And that there's some of the initiatives that the sporting organizations are doing right now.
Yeah, and it's not something that we've just started doing, because if we go back, we've been around for a little while. If we go back through some of the things that we've even been doing locally around Anki Overdrive, right? So I remember doing that in 2016, 15, 16, that kind of time frame. SailGP more recently, Smart Cities Proxima with the Lego and Weather Station, and
Yes.
I remember those tubes that you had, right?
I've still got those pipes.
The pipes that you traveled with us. Hang on, what does that look like? But we've been bringing these new experiences to really bring the data to life around these different products. And it's been interesting to explore what we've been able to do with those things.
It has, because there's a common theme. They're all pretty much the same thing. I don't know if my secret's out. They're all the same thing rehashed. The secret is what we did with the data. We just find a fun way to represent either where the data is being generated or what effect we're having with the data. So whether it be Anki, where we found a way to drag data out of those toys, or even something more serious like a wind turbine. These things are generating data. So what we do is we look at the data that comes out of it and we go, how can we use this with using the modern technologies that we have access to? So that includes, all of the mundane subjects like integration, all those things that no one, they're important, but they don't set the world on fire. So what we do is we've used visualization as that way of getting people excited about what they see. But the serious side is really around, how do we take raw data, give it context, turn it into information, and give it some life that people can react to. I think my favorite part, of things like analytics or predictive analytics and IoT, we've been doing predictive analytics for some time, is this idea that we start looking at patterns of data and looking at what's happening, and computers give us a new power that we never had, which is being able to crunch lots of data, and there's so much more now. And so I think what we're doing is we've always looked at ways to generate data that's a bit interesting and gets people engaged a little bit. That's where those things come in. But that's no different to what a Formula One car is doing or an F50 catamaran in SailGP. They're generating data, we're doing something with it, and then we're trying to react or predict what we do or change our behavior based on what we now see. And then there's a new element to that, which is the predictive side, which is also key to understanding what could happen.
So I've been on Discord already, and there's been plenty of people in there say, if you are watching and you haven't registered, get in there, register for the hackathon and get amongst it. But one of the questions I saw there was around Challenge 1 and the weather prediction. All right, so as part of that, there was some references to the F1 game and say, hey, there's a model around that. So why even create a weather prediction model if it already happens in the game? So it was a little bit of a bit of a fractal kind of thing in there. So what's your working with the team and seeing that, and also the stuff that you've seen from SailGP, what do How do you react to that?
Yeah, I like the question because, you know, the reality is that when you are on a racetrack, weather happens. And in the game, they've done that really well. What generally, and Formula One, you know, is probably a really good example for this one, is that before and during a race, there's lots of simulations happening. A lot of it is what if. I do smile because, you know, what if simulations, Monte Carlo, and back to Formula One and racing, it's quite nice there. I'm sure that's possibly by accident. So the teams will do a lot of predictive analytics, in fact, thousands of of simulations during a race weekend. So while the cars are on the track, they're constantly looking at what's going on now, what happens if. Now, what happens if could be a whole raft of scenarios. You know, if A overtakes B, then what do we do? The cars act very differently. The weather is a key one here. So what you'll see is there's a lot of decision making going on. And in fact, races are won and lost on decisions. But that's no different to real business. So the simulations are saying, you know, if rain is due in 10 minutes, but my tires are only going to last 5 minutes, what do I do? What is the effect of? If I change my tires now? So these constant simulations are helping the teams understand the best way to win the race. So then I suppose, you know, if you take that aspect, there's always a human element to that as well. And what happens on the track, for instance, if Bono suddenly calls Lewis Hamilton into the pits, but Lewis doesn't want to, they use the data to say, well, look, there's a chance that this is going to happen. This might happen. The human element still exists, but the simulation gives them the evidence, if you want to call it that, but that safety net almost to say, look, this is what could happen if you do that. That's why the simulations are important.
Yeah, you raise an interesting phrase in there, being the human element, right? So there may be some of those times that you may consider, hang on, the data's telling me this, but from all my experience and looking at the human element, especially in sports, where you got that mental grit around how things happen, then sometimes the data is not really going to tell you the same thing. There's been some few crackers examples recently, right? So like in the tennis.
The tennis, well, that was a brilliant one. I think it was Guillermo Ruiz had posted an image of the predictive analytics at the Australian Open, and Nadal was 2 sets down and, you know, gone to all intents and purposes, and the predictive analytics gave him a 4% chance of winning the Open. And if you're into tennis, you might know that he then went on to win in 5 sets and 5.5 hours or something. It was a crazy long game.
Second longest game in the Oz Open.
Yeah, so the predictive analytics. I mean, I'm a massive football fan, and you know we do the same in Premier League. And you know a team can be 3-0 down, and they give them a 1% chance. Well, the 1% does happen. So you know the funny thing about data is there's probably no emotion in there.
Yeah.
And that human element is key. But look, I think that's one of my favorite terms. And I don't know whether or not it's a good term or not. And, you know, I've stolen it many times, is humans learning from machine learning. So the machine will give you so much more of a view on the data, but the human element, you can learn from that, but you still got that human element. I don't know if that'll ever go away, but certainly the data still gives us a much broader basis on which to make decisions.
Yeah, and especially with the different challenges that are being presented as part of the hackathon, then there is going to be always the human element in terms of taking that forward. So just to wrap it up a little bit here, then just want to run through a couple of these challenges and say, okay, just go through what they are. Not necessarily the challenge statements; they'll be released at the beginning of the hackathon, but some of the thinking around the challenges and where does data sort of fit into driving that. Sure. So challenge one, you described that perfectly with that weather prediction question around, it is around creating that support decision-making process to use data. And like CellGP, there's so many data points on there that they can learn from and to make a better decision. So challenge one is all about using that data to create that fantastic support mechanism to do that. What's your take for challenge two around the AR metaverse?
Sure. So for me, that the simple way of explaining that is the digital twin. It is using data from whatever systems we want, whatever data we have access to, turning that into information, and then giving us those visual cues. So a good example that we've been working on in the background or with other organizations is the construction industry. You know, they'll have digital plans and you overlay that on terms of what has actually been built. We've got defect analysis. So the data gives us those cues, those areas to search for. Is something being built in the right place? Is there an oversight? And these things do happen. So, and also progress, we use the digital data to gauge progress. I'm sorry. So when we do that, we get data, we get information, and we get the visual cue at the same time. And that is a powerful tool. Having used it and start to see, it's good fun, but it's also got a serious side. So digital twin is probably the best simple term to explain number two, challenge two.
So then challenge three is, you could almost see that challenge three is related to the digital twin in terms of creating that landscape and all that. But I think, especially from the Blender side where you're creating that model and also extending that into Blender Python to actually generate that, then that takes that whole digital twin in a totally different direction.
It does. So one of the things I quite like about challenge three, and we sort of come up against this in one or two projects that we've been working on, is that the metaverse, and Oracle's not a visual company in that respect. We're not into animations and all of those things. I suppose there are areas in marketing that do that stuff. It's not core business for us. So one thing with the metaverse is that generating a landscape, generating an environment of which you're operating in is very much down to illustrators and those sorts of things. However, with Blender and the data, you can build these things. So there's a kind of an intermediate part between illustrators, so someone drawing an environment, and one being generated, which this is procedural algorithms that you can generate landscapes and trees and buildings with these procedural tools, and they're very, very cool. But what if we could use the data to build an actual space? And so you take away a lot of we do some Blender work here. It's very heavy lifting. It's kind of cool if you've got the time, and that's the key there, right? So we've always used IT technology to save time, to automate that sort of thing. So number three is really around that automation of generating an environment or assets, whatever they may be, from actual data, from real data. So really, really cool. I mean, not only just using Blender on Oracle Cloud, which is kind of an underlying thing. It's not just about that. It's actually about using real data. So I'm a big fan of that one. It's digital twin, but not quite. It's digital twin in a more environmental aspect rather than a specific object.
Yeah, because you're never going to always have the data points. So as part of this, you may only have a certain subset of data points or coordinates for racetrack and stuff like that. So how, based upon that minimal piece of information, can you use other sources or other techniques to actually generate the required model landscape that you require? Yeah,
so you've raised a good point there, because GPS and world space is the coordinate system inside of virtual reality. They're not necessarily connected. In fact, they're not connected at all. So GPS
on purpose.
Well, maybe it is on purpose, but yeah, I mean, and so that is a challenge for sure. So
yeah.
I think that in itself is where that one is born, in that, you know, we've got lots of data. We can use tools like Blender, Python to generate from a script. You can generate 3D objects. So take the script one stage further, provide it with some data, and you actually can build real things at that point. It's having done Blender and a lot of it, it's awesome, but it's kind of hard work.
So let's work smarter, not harder.
Well, absolutely. Automation, you know, that's a common theme anyway. And that's really, you know, if you want to tag challenge 3 with a term like challenge 2 is digital twin, then challenge 3 is around automation.
Yeah, no, that's cool. So I appreciate the time to actually go through that. There's a lot of stuff that we sort of went through, the challenges, some of the background around using data within these kind of spaces. On the surface, you say, hey, this is what it looks like, but a lot of these things are like an onion.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that's the beauty of our industry, right? And it keeps changing. I love the fact that the onion keeps changing into a beetroot. It's an Australian thing. They love beetroots over.
Oh, enjoy the time. I'll see you on the weekend. It'll be see you on Discord and the like. So
you will.
appreciate your time. Thanks, Coggins.
Thanks, man. Cheers.
Cheers.